So we've managed to connect to our database. Now let's do something useful with the connection pool that's available to us. So let's go to our models directory and open models.go. And we'll start setting up the things necessary to connect our handlers to our database. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new type called models. And that's just a struct. And it's going to have one member, which I'll call DB for database. It's going to hold something called DB model. Okay, and that doesn't exist yet, but don't worry about that. We'll get to it in a minute. And underneath that, I'm going to create a new function called new models. And that is a function that takes one parameter, which I'll call DB. And it's of type pointer to SQL.db. And I'll choose it from the pick list here, so it does the auto import for me. And there it is. And it returns the models type we just created. So in that, it just has one return statement, and it returns a models struct that holds as its member DB model, which doesn't exist yet, but we're getting to that in a moment. And it has a member DB that's of type DB, or it has the DB that we've passed to this as a parameter. Okay, now let's go create that DB model. To do that, I'm going to create a new Go file in my models directory. And this is where I'll put my database functions. So that file, I'll just call it movies-db.go. Doesn't matter what I call it as long as it ends in Go. So it has a package declaration. And inside of that, I'll create a type. And this is where I put my DB model type. And it's a struct. And it has one member called DB. That's a pointer to SQL.db. And again, I'll allow the import to be added automatically. So in here, we're going to have our database functions. And I'll just create a couple right now and just put stubs in. So this will be a func with a receiver of M. That's what I'm calling my receiver. And it's a pointer to DB model, the type we just created. And this will be called get. And it takes one parameter, ID, int. And this will return a pointer to a movie model and potentially an error. And right now, I'll just say return nil, nil, so it'll compile. Then I'll copy this entire function and paste it here and call this one all. And it returns a slice of a pointers to movies. So the first function, of course, is how we're going to get one movie from the database. And the second one is how we're going to get all movies from the database. So now that we have these set up, if we look at our models, the errors should go away. And we probably should put some comments in here just to be good programmers. Models is the wrapper for database. And new models returns models with DB pool. And we may as well do these ones at the same time. Anything that's exported is supposed to have a comment, so we may as well do that. Is the type for movies, and genre is the type for genre, and finally movie genre. Is the type for movie genre. And back in our movies DB, let's give our two stubs comments. Returns one movie and error, if any, and all. Returns all movies and error, if any. Okay. So now back in our main function, we have to make some changes here. We've created those functions and so forth in our models package, and now we need to use them. So the first thing we'll do is in our application struct, our type for application, we'll add a models field, or member. Models of type models dot models. And then down here where we populate our application struct, models will be assigned the value of, and we'll just call that function new models, and hand it the DB variable that we created up here on line 49. So let's try running this, or just compiling it to make sure it all runs. Go run cmd/api/star.go. See if we get anything wrong. No, everything compiled right. That's good. So let's go back and do something useful in our movies.db right here. So right now, let's just get this one function, get, working. Now we're going to take advantage of the context, as you should when you're working with a database. So ctx is a variable I'm creating, and cancel. And these are populated from the context package. And we'll say with timeout. And I'll pick it from the list so it does the import. And we're getting it from our default context in the background, context.background. And we want a timeout of, say, 3 seconds. 3 times time.second. Okay, so that creates 2 variables, and we'll defer our cancel. So if things go wrong, it will just cancel the query. And let's write a query. Now our query is pretty straightforward. We're going to make a really easy one to start with. Select ID and title and description and year and release date and runtime and MPAA rating. And we'll also get created at and updated at from movies, where ID equals $1, and that's our placeholder. So that's our query. Now we'll take advantage of that query to populate a row variable. One row is assigned the value of, from our M variable, from the receiver, .db, and now we have query row context, and that's the one we want. We want to get one row, if it exists, from the database, and timeout if it takes more than 3 seconds. So we have to hand that, our context that we created back up on line 15, and our query, and we want to substitute the ID we received as a parameter to the get function for the $1 that's in our query. So we just put ID. And now we create a new variable, var, and I'll call it movie, of type movie. And we'll check for an error and try scanning from this row, row.scan, and we'll scan right into ampersand movie.id is the first row, and I'll just duplicate this a few times to save some typing. The second value is our title. The third value is the description. The fourth value is the year. Then the release date. Then the runtime, and a few more duplications. MPAA rating. Created at. And updated at. And I think I missed a row. I think there's also rating. Let's just see if there is. Ampersand movie.rating. Yes, there is. So rating. And that should come after release date. So right here, we'll put in rating. Okay, if there's an error, if error is not equal to nil, return nil and our error, which is ERR. Otherwise, return the movie and nil. Now, we can't return a movie because we're returning up here a pointer to a movie. So we'll make this a reference to the movie by putting an ampersand in front of it. And that should work. So now, if we go back to our handlers, movie handlers, and we look at this part where we're actually grabbing one movie, I can just comment this entire section out where I'm hard-coding that movie, and instead call the database. And that's as simple as populate the variable movie and potentially an error, ERR, by calling app.models, which we added a little while ago. We don't want the all function, we want the get function. And we're going to pass it the ID that we grabbed from the URL. And nothing else should change. So let's see if this works. Let's open this up and run our application. Go run cmd/web/API/star.go. And we have some problems here in movie handlers. Of course, I need to save that to get rid of these extra imports. So I'll save it and run this again. And it's listening, so let's go to our web browser. And we'll go to localhost 4000/v1/movie/1 and see what we get. And there is the Shawshank Redemption right from our database. Let's change it to 2. And there is The Godfather. So this works really well. Now, there is one problem with this, of course. If we go back and look at our models, we actually have, in our description for movie, we have movie genre. And I commented that out. I didn't comment it out. I told Jason to ignore it. I don't want that to be ignored. I actually want that to be populated with genres, if any, from the database. Now, right now, if I look at my database, I have 4 movies in the database, but under movies genres, there's nothing there. So here's a bit of a challenge for you. What I'd like you to do is, in your code, back in your moviesdb.go, or movies-db.go, I want you to modify this get function so that after you create and populate this movie variable, and before you return it, in other words, right here, get the genres. Now, presumably, you've worked with databases in Go before, or you wouldn't be taking this course because, as it says in the course prerequisites, some familiarity with Go and with Postgres is required, but I'll get you started anyway. You're going to populate a new query, so you can reuse that query variable. That'll be equal to whatever you want. Then you'll populate a variable, maybe called rows, and you'll check for an error if you want to, but I'm going to just comment it out right now, or leave it out by saying ignore the errors. You will call m.db.queryContext, and you'll hand that the context, and your query, and the ID for the movie that you want. And this will be populated with the genres, if any. So all you really need to do is to write the query, to create a variable that is a slice of movie genre, and then populate your movie variable with that value, movie genre. So give that a go. And it might take you a little while, but it shouldn't be that hard. The SQL is very, very simple. So give that a whirl, and in the next lecture, I'll show you how I solve this problem.